the body occupying space. Perhaps noticing how the body is contained within a space. How we experience a space within and a space without. Just bringing a relaxed attention to the felt sense of the body. Perhaps sitting, perhaps standing, perhaps reclining, just knowing the experience of the body in this moment. You might notice if there's any area of the body that is in need of some additional attention. Maybe there's some soreness, some tightness, quality of contraction or constriction. If you find such an area, just bringing the attention gently there, offering a kind and caring attention. Honoring that experience of the body. Simply allowing the body to settle and arrive. I often think of it as a snow globe. When we first arrive, the snow globe is shaken and turbulent. But when it becomes still, it clears, it settles. Being aware of the body settling. As the body rests in the stillness, I invite you to begin to notice the movement of the breath, becoming aware of the body breathing. Bringing a relaxed attention to wherever in the body you most readily experience the breath. And allow the attention to just lightly rest there. Knowing the felt sense of the breath as it breathes the body. Knowing breathing in, knowing breathing out. Knowing that this breath feels like this. A relaxed attention, attending to the breath, breathing in, breathing out. returning, returning to the body, returning to the breath. Whenever we notice that the mind has taken us for a ride, we just step off of that ride and begin again, being aware of the body, being aware of the body breathing. Attending to the in-breath, attending to the out-breath. Perhaps beginning to notice the pauses between the breaths. Beginning to notice the stillness, and then the movement, following that movement from beginning to end, and once again settling back into the stillness. Attending to the pause, attending to the beginning of the breath, the middle of the breath, the end of the breath. Back to attending with the pause, the stillness. Relaxed attention, attending to the stillness, to the movement, to the stillness. That soft and gentle rhythm. Pause, in breath, out breath, back to pause. Knowing that it feels like this right now. breathing out. Breathing in, breathing out. Knowing the ease of just following the breath. The contentment of just knowing this breath as it arises and passes. And as needed, simply beginning again, becoming aware of the body, becoming aware of the body breathing. Knowing the felt sense of the breath breathing the body. Nothing we need to, but simply attend to that experience. This breath, it feels like this right now. So it's a joy for me to be here this evening. For those who've joined since we uh, began the meditation, I'm coming to you from Fredericksburg, Virginia, and I'm one of the teachers in the Insight community down here. I live along the Rappahannock River and the unceded lands of the Potomac peoples. And this evening I want to share with you some thoughts about practicing with conflict and polarization. So we don't have to look far to see examples of polarization in America. Whether the issue is the critical nature of climate change, the diminishing of democracy, the real cost of gun violence, which sadly we've seen quite a bit of in the last couple of days, or the loss of reproductive rights, there is a deep divide on how these issues should be addressed. The congressional hearings concerning the January 6, 2021 storming of the Capitol is a prime and very illustrative example of this polarization. If you identify with the Democratic Party, then it is likely that you view these events of 6 January as an instance of insurrection, and you support the hearings, seeing them as a legitimate oversight function. If instead you identify with the Republican Party, then it is likely that you view these events as an instance of free speech, and you oppose the hearings, seeing them as politically motivated. As practitioners, how do we work with such differences and conflicts, whether they be internal, interpersonal, or societal? When issues get as polarized as they are, there is often an associated paralysis in finding a workable and acceptable solution. At the core of the problem is a lack of empathy and understanding of those viewed as on the other side. This can be a breakdown of friendship, there can be a breakdown of communication, a collegiality, self-righteousness, dogmatism, caricature, even demonization can readily arise. In an On Being interview, actually probably a year or more ago, Adrienne Marie Brown, a social justice activist, said, quote, "We are brilliant at survival, but brutal at it. We tend to slip out of togetherness the way we slip out of the womb, bloody and messy and surprised to be alone, and clever, able to learn with our whole bodies the way of this world." End quote. Ms. Brown had been on sabbatical where she abstained from social media. This was as the pandemic began to unfold, and when she re-engaged, she realized that it felt like everyone was canceling each other out, even in the social justice organizations which she was involved. She observed, again, quote, "I know this was happening before I stepped away, but I was normalized it because I was in it every day. When I came back, it just felt so intense. It didn't feel like what we were supposed to be up to. Can we do it a different way? Could we do it with love? And can we be honest that there's not love in the way we're doing it now? Saying we just have to love each other and then doing the most awful dismissals and disposals of each other." End quote. How many of us have witnessed, perhaps even perpetrated, such canceling of another person? I know that I have both witnessed and done it. So much polarization can be distressing and depressing. The ubiquity of the internet has exacerbated this problem. It is so easy to get trapped in its informational silos and social bubbles, leading to the point of fearing the other side and what they might do. Difference and conflict have become a major concern in this country and in other parts of the world. So, how do we understand and work with conflict and polarization? How can we use the resources of our practice to address polarization and conflict, whether it's internal or interpersonal or societal? Interestingly, the same practices can be used across each of these dimensions. The working premise here is that polarization and conflict can be approached skillfully. And let me begin here by clarifying what is meant by conflict in this talk. Conflict means the presence of a difference. For example, I might have a conflict, a difference, with Linda, my wife and partner, about what color to paint the bathroom. Conflict can also connote hostility or aggression, as in conflict or fight between opposing forces. And this conflict refers to a difference that doesn't necessarily contain hostility or aggression. In this context, conflict dealt with well and skillfully deepens relationships, deepens community, and deepens learning. Sadly, this is often not how conflict is dealt with. When conflict is dealt with unskillfully, relationships often deteriorate, and at the best remain static, full of conflict. The Dhamma offers 5 practices that can be resources in addressing conflict and differences. From the Eightfold Path, there are wise effort, wise view, wise mindfulness, and wise speech. From the Brahma Viharas, there are kindness and compassion, which I'm treating as empathy, a unified practice. So starting with wise effort. Are we willing to explore the conflict? Most of us approach conflict based on one of 2 forms of social conditioning. Based on our upbringing and experience, we are either conflict avoidant or conflict indulgent. Those of us who are conflict avoidant, which happens to be me, find conflict scary. And as the labeling indicates, we deploy strategies to avoid conflict. Those of us who are conflict indulgent find conflict challenging, engaging. We indulge ourselves with the conflict. It may be that we are not aware of our tendencies around conflict. No matter, we can bring wise effort to conflict by being willing to move into it, to explore it. Can we be open to the differences present in the conflict? Can we explore and get to know the space of that conflict? Bringing wise effort to conflict can begin to counter our conditioning. If we are conflict avoidant, we can establish a conscious intention to be comfortable with the conflict. If we're conflict indulgent, we can intentionally create some space within and around the conflict. Kindness and compassion. Are we willing to bring empathy to the conflict? Empathy is based on the open heart created when kindness and compassion are expressed. It is a tuning into another's experience. Empathy is a natural capacity with which we are all born, but which we can also learn to suppress. It is the ability to listen to another whose views are different than ours and to be curious about the other person's views rather than trying to defeat them from the beginning. Empathy, which is crucial to skillfully addressing conflict, may take the form of emotional empathy, cognitive empathy, or both. Emotional empathy arises when we are aware of the emotions another person is experiencing in the situation. Cognitive empathy arises when we are aware of what is meaningful for, what matters to another person in the situation. That is what that person needs in that situation. An empathy practice that tunes into another person's emotions and needs is highly skillful. While the context of conflict is important, within the context of conflict, it is important to distinguish between the needs and the strategies being used to satisfy those needs. For example, I might have a need for peace. Sometimes my strategy is skillful, like taking a walk in the woods. Other times my strategy might be less skillful, by having several glasses of wine. What is important in working with conflict is to remember that strategies can be skillful or unskillful, but all needs are genuine and valid. When we are in conflict, the difference we are having with someone might be about the strategy, not the need. Tuning into a person's emotions and needs allows us to discern when the difference and conflicts lie, and where those differences and conflicts lie. We don't have to accept a person's strategy, but we can still acknowledge the genuineness and validity of their emotions and their needs. Empathy is about valuing relationship, even with our opponents. Wise view. Are we willing to recognize our attachment to views during conflicts? Is anyone here attached to views? I know, yes, I know I am quite readily. Part of this practice is becoming aware of the views with which we are attached, identifying them. We're not being asked to give up our views, but can we be willing to give up how rigidly attached to them that we are? How do we know when we are rigidly attached? We can simply ask our partners and our friends. They will almost certainly be willing to provide the answer. I know Linda is. She frequently tells me when I'm hanging on to things too tightly. The exercise, the practice is to become aware of what those views are. According to the Dharma, working with views is central to practice. Buddha stated, anger, confusion, and dishonesty arise when things are set in pairs as opposites. Polarization was as true 2,500 years ago when Buddha walked the earth as it is today. He also said, views at best are helpful and skillful. We should not think that they convey absolute truth. At best, views are useful, but they are certainly not reality, not all of reality. In fact, views can be quite harmful. The practice is to notice when and about what we have a strong view, being aware of it. What is it like? What is going on when I'm in the midst of this view? What's my experience of it? What's connected to it? Is there anger, sadness, fear? Am I open to another person's view about this? Do I want all people to have my view? Am I really interested in hearing other people's perspective? Am I open to changing my view? The practice of wise view makes for a deep and juicy inquiry and for rich and rewarding dialogues. Wise mindfulness. Are we willing to be mindful of our own reactivity during conflict? Can we bring mindfulness to bear when we get really upset? Being aware of any difficult emotions that come up when our views differ than those of others and are challenged. Are we sad? Are we anxious? Angry? Can we be with the difficult emotion, with our own reactivity? This practice invites us to explore the judging mind as it manifests in the moment. It also invites us to recall such moments during our formal practice when we are settled, when we can bring them up in a place of relative safety, a place of refuge, and work with them there. It is important for us to be cognizant of the level of emotional intensity and whether it is in workable range. When it is too much, say 8 to 10 on a scale of 10, it is appropriate to let it go and rebalance, perhaps taking some deep breaths, or focusing on a restoring resource, or even taking a walk. When it's in the workable range, we explore it with practices like naming what's happening, seeing what emotions are present, knowing how it feels in the body, how it feels in the mind. Perhaps even bringing a strategy of rain to the inquiry. Wise speech. Are we willing to follow the principles of wise speech during conflict? When we have differences and conflicts, it's very helpful to work within the guidelines of wise speech. These guidelines, which came from Buddha over 2,500 years ago, are being truthful, being helpful, coming from a kind heart, even when we're disagreeing and saying no, and having good timing. All these factors must be present for it to be skillful speech. In the context of conflicts, good timing is really crucial. We can be truthful, we can be helpful, we can be kind, but if we have bad timing, it often results in a total mess. Can we say what is truthful to us without being reactive or demonizing of the other? So the Dhamma provides us with a variety of tools with which to address the difference, the conflict, the polarization that we experience in America and the world today. From the Brahma Viharas, the practices of kindness and compassion in the form of empathy. From the Eightfold Path, the practices of wise effort, wise view, wise mindfulness, and wise speech. And returning to the words of Adrienne Marie Brown, quote, "Everything is falling apart, but also new things are possible." And Octavia Brown said that there's nothing new under the sun, but there are new suns. We are in a time of new suns, so it's time to change, and we can be mindful about that. That's exciting. End quote. So I'd like to end with a poem by Rosemary Watoller Tromer. It's entitled Because. So I can't save the world, can't even save myself, can't wrap my arms around every frightened child, can't foster peace among nations, can't bring love to all who feel unlovable. So I practice opening my heart right here in this room and being gentle with my insufficiency. I practice walking down the street heart first. And if it is insufficient to share love, I will practice loving anyway. I want to converse about truth, about trust. I want to invite compassion into every interaction. One willing heart can't stop a war. One willing heart can't feed all the hungry. And sometimes, daunted by a task too big, I tell myself, what's the use of trying? But today, the invitation is clear to be ridiculously courageous in love, to open the heart like a lilac in May, knowing freeze is possible and opening anyway, to take love seriously, to give love wildly, to race up to the world as if I were a puppy, adoring and unjaded, stumbling on my own exuberance, to feel the shock of indifference, of anger, of cruelty, of fear, and stay open, to love as if it matters, as if the world depends on it. So thank you for listening. I understand there's a tradition for